For the Nigerian key institutions, we need to start with their federal system, the federal setup. They do have a federal system, 3 branches of the state and government. And the federal basics are that Nigeria does have 36 states, almost 800 local governments, and each of them does have an executive, legislative, and judicial branch. So when you get asked about the descriptor for Nigerian federalism, that is it. And they have gone up from 3 to 36 states over the course of time. Remember, it was a parliamentary system during the First Republic. The Second and Fourth Republics did embrace a presidential system, which would, again, like we said in the other one, have a unifying figure perhaps above parliamentary politics and be able to be checked by power as well. Checked by the other powers, and an independent judiciary, and that has been effective at times, ineffective at others, consistently waiting for the legislature and judiciary to prove to be stronger branches in Nigeria. The creation of their institutions was very top-down. This did not happen grassroots, bottom-up. It was very much driven from above. Interest groups in Nigeria have been historically powerful, and civil society in Nigeria has been historically powerful. We know that religious interest groups over the course of time have been very important. Some of those civil society groups and interest groups have been the most effective and strongest because they have advocated for their respective positions, and they just have been for a long, long time. They have been very active. NUPENG is a union that is the oil workers union. So just we have heard that acronym. And then there are human rights groups that operate in Nigeria as well. Again, civil society, we talked about MOSAP, Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, amongst others. Other human rights groups that are environmentally based or human rights based in terms of women's rights or criminal justice reform, things like that. They're all evident in Nigeria. So civil society strong, as is the media in Nigeria. Along with Britain, it is the freest media that we have of the AP6. Bureaucratically in Nigeria, it is a problem. It is big, and it is inefficient, and it is corrupt. It's sloppy. It is really, really driven by a culture of both clientelism and prebendalism. So very much jobs based on loyalty, a lot of skimming money from the oil industry especially. All ethnicities must be represented in the bureaucracy according to the general percentage that they are seen in the general Nigerian population. Parastatals in Nigeria, they have them, as do some of the other countries we talk about, for sure, especially when we talk about Iran and Mexico, into Russia as well. And, well, we could keep going, I suppose. But a lot of them are owned by corporations operated by the state. The intent is to provide services that would not maybe be done by the private sector and maybe deemed too important, so that it should be delivered by the state so that everyone has access to those services. That does not mean it always works. The leaders of the parastatals are oftentimes part of the president's patronage network, so there's a lot of clientelism there. And yes, you see some of the listings here: water, electricity, transport, agricultural subsidies, and so forth. Those are some examples of what parastatals do in Nigeria. Never expect power always. Remember that has given way to the Power Holding Company of Nigeria from an electrical standpoint, or please hold a candle now. Nigeria also has an oil parastatal called the NNPC, and that is operating in concert with the multinationals that are in the Delta. Parastatals offer up a source of nationalism, security, and sovereignty to countries like Nigeria. Remember in Mexico when Lázaro Cárdenas nationalized oil and created the state-run parastatal Pemex, it was seen as this big statement for Mexico's sovereignty against foreign influence in Mexican resources, and so that's an example of how that does play out. The Independent National Electoral Commission, their INEC, need to be able to make comparisons and recognize that this is their version of Mexico's former IFE, now INE, and they have gotten better over the course of time, has the INEC. The 2007 elections were awful fraudulent, all sorts of vandalizing, all sorts of fraudulent votes, people chasing others away from the ballot box with machetes, and just suspicious vote counts. Now, the 2011 elections were very much cleaner, more violence ensued, and then the 2015 elections, where Buhari defeated Jonathan, seen as legitimate, and these have been steps in the right direction for Nigeria. So, very low turnout in 2019. And the 2019 elections, in which Buhari did win re-election, accusations that the system did not work, accusations by the losing side that the vote was fixed and that Buhari cheated, and we haven't seen enough evidence yet on that to make a real judgment. The president of Nigeria is the head of state and head of government. Remember that both Mexico and Nigeria are presidential systems. Russia is not. Russia is semi-presidential. So therefore, the president is the head of state and head of government, serves both of those roles. Of course, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The president is elected in Nigeria by that unique vote method of you must win the national vote, and it's confusing. Sometimes a majority, sometimes a plurality, depending on the certain situation. If you say that the president must win the national vote, and then also get at least 25% of the vote in 2/3 of Nigeria's 36 states, you will be fine on that. So that 25% of the vote in 2/3 of the Nigerian states is meant to try to solidify the fact that a president must have national appeal and can't just be driven by regional support with high populations. President then is able to serve 2 4-year terms, and this is just like the U.S. model. There's not a consecutive there, like we've seen in Russia and Iran, as their 2 consecutive terms play out, and Russia's 2 consecutive 6s now, I know. But the 2 4-year terms are what the Nigerians have utilized and will continue to do so based on the 1999 Constitution. President gets to appoint the ministers. They are not members of the legislature. This is the separation of powers in a presidential system, not the fusion of powers. President may propose law, supports law. He has veto power, also controls the public purse, controls the budget to a greater degree than some of the other countries we talk about. So that's a major power of the president in Nigeria. Also, each state has to be represented in the cabinet. And so that it's again trying to utilize the Nigerian system to alleviate identity concerns, ethnic cleavages, and try to give everyone a voice. And of course, that runs a risk sometimes as well. Legislatively in Nigeria, they haven't had a legislature at times, and so we think about, for instance, the second military regime between 1983 and 1989. It was military rule, so the military councils made the policy, and so lots of inexperience to begin in 1999 when the Fourth Republic began. The reputation is that it is ineffective and corrupt. The legislature dominated right now by 2 major parties. It is the PDP and the APC, All Progressives Congress, and the People's Democratic Party. And the APC does have actually, this should be updated, apologies here, has a majority in both houses after the 2019 elections. So the APC has a majority in both houses after 2019, after the elections that just took place a handful of weeks ago. Legislatively in Nigeria, the electoral method involves electing from the upper house 3 senators from each of Nigeria's 36 states, 1 from the federal capital territory of Abuja. These are SMD plurality elections in each state, and so 3 senators from each state in the upper house. That's equal representation, just like Mexico has and just like Russia has from a federal perspective. And the lower house has single-member districts equally populated throughout the country, 360 diverse districts based on population. That is a single-member district plurality vote, SMD plurality, first past the post. And both the houses serve 4-year terms in Nigeria, 4-year terms for both of them. Lots of ethnic coalitions in the legislature, lots of factionalism as well, even amongst the big parties, because obviously Nigeria, because of zero sum and because of the diversity of the country, if you do put those two things together, if you try to make a national party like the PDP or the APC, you are going to get a lot of factionalism. And so the legislature is tough at times, and legislative authority just has not been able to act as a realistic power alongside the presidency. It's all been about the president. Nigeria's judiciary, again, our key points there, are that they utilize both Sharia law and common law. And common law is a vestige of the United Kingdom's colonial time. Sharia law is utilized in 12 northern states. It's an excellent example of the use of federalism to try to address identity concerns and cleavages, because Muslims can be assuaged, the thought is, by allowing Sharia law to function in 12 northern states. That doesn't mean it's only Sharia law. Common law is present there as well. They have different functions in terms of what the laws pertain to. So they have parallel Sharia and common law courts in the northern states, and up to a degree nationally as well. The Nigerian Supreme Court does have the power of judicial review. Constitutionally, has not been terribly strong, but they do have it. Getting more independent, still questions about what happens when they become independent, and I say that largely because of the judicial dictate to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in the 2006, 2007, 2008 era, when the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, led by our friend, the man we stand up for in Nigeria, Nuhu Ribadu, they were investigating just an awful lot of PDP bigwigs, and they got to be very powerful in terms of who they were arresting, and they were told to cool their jets. They wouldn't, and so eventually the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission was shut down. Nuhu Ribadu had to flee the country for a bit, and it was an example of how the PDP corruption was going to limit the ability of the state to stem that corruption. So that's the judiciary. Rule of law is relatively weak, inconsistent, and the Nigerian judiciary continues to evolve. Cleavages in Nigeria are a big story because it's the only one of the 6 of the AP6 that nationally has cumulative cleavages. So the cumulative cleavage, where Group A is pitted against Group B on nearly every question. You don't have cross-cutting between ethnicity, religion, social class, race, and all of that. So it does lend itself to a lack of national unity because of the cumulative piece of that, and groups don't feel the need to cooperate and engage with each other on a basis that is for all. So the ethnic cleavages are very real. Oftentimes they coincide with religious cleavages. So Northern Hausa Fulani Muslims versus southeastern Igbo Christians and so forth. So that includes region as well. Urban-rural cleavages in Nigeria are very substantial. The rural areas, in a lot of cases, are very underdeveloped. The north is underdeveloped from a regional standpoint compared to what we see in the south at times. Lagos is a different beast than would be seen in some of the northern cities, for sure. And when we talk about social class, what you see is just astounding differences in inequality, and the poverty level and the number of Nigerians who live in poverty and absolute poverty. Contrast that with the fact that Nigeria is the fastest growing champagne market in the world, and you have this incredible group of people, let me rephrase that, incredible group of wealth procured by some people, in a lot of cases through corruption. That makes it very challenging to solve those economic issues. The oil itself is largely in the Niger Delta. It is where over 90% of the oil is, and that it is going to go offshore as well when we talk about the oil. The big operators are multinationals like Shell and Exxon and Chevron. The multinationals all operate in concert with the NNPC. So the multinationals are very much there. They have minority stakes. However, they have a tremendous amount of political power. Shell historically has operated as almost a part of the state in Nigeria, and a powerful part of the state. Over 90 oil fields, you see 1,000 wells, almost 4,000 miles of oil pipeline. Nigeria is sometimes called the Republic of Shell. Lots of criticism of the oil companies for pollution and a lack of sensitivity to what Nigerians really want. And also, Shell in particular got savaged pretty good because of their alleged involvement potentially in the hanging of Ken Saro-Wiwa and his 8 Ogoni compatriots in 1995. So lots of oil money utilized to pay the bribes, win elections, and then do it all over again in 4 years. The Niger Delta has seen a couple of different rebel groups pop up. One for a number of years, beginning 2006-ish, they got to be a big deal. A big deal was the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta and MEND, so movement for the movement for the emancipation of the Niger Delta. MEND was a group out to highlight the economic inequalities, out to demand more economic compensation for people in the Delta, and out to demand that the oil companies be more environmentally responsible. And they did MEND through, they blew up oil pipelines, they detonated explosives on oil rigs operating. They kidnapped a lot of oil workers, foreign oil workers, and held them for ransom in order to publicize their cause. MEND kind of went away. The state kind of co-opted them, and so in large part the state had to deal with this in the Delta, and so the state paid a lot of money to some of these MEND members to essentially bring them on board with the state and to co-opt them into not being part of this rebel group anymore. And now today, you've had another group pop up called the Niger Delta Avengers, operate with a lot of the same principles as MEND does, and a little bit more of a modern twist, perhaps, than we saw with MEND. So there was the movement for the emancipation in Niger Delta, like I said. Then we have the Avengers, same kind of principle, for sure, with those two groups. The prebendal notion in Nigeria is that state offices are used to produce benefits, monetary and otherwise, for people and their friends, family, their constituents, their kin groups. And so with the oil money, that is the single biggest. It's not the only one, but the attitude really is in Nigeria that if you go to government and you don't come back with anything, your people are going to think you haven't been wise in terms of how you use your head. So it is, and that political culture is tough to break. The most extreme example was General Abacha, the military ruler in the 90s, allegedly taken $3 to $5 billion from the Nigerian state, and the Nigerian state still seeking to get that money back from a bunch of European bank accounts. When corruption is so evident in all aspects of your life, and those of you who read Every Day is for the Thief by Teju Cole very much know this, it's really hard to apply practical solutions. There's a bullet like this in the Russian presentation as well, where it says without civil society, without independent media, without a strong judiciary, it's tough to stomp out corruption. And it's the same kind of principle here, making it very, very difficult